Good evening and welcome at the French Institute for the second day of the Beyond Words Festival. For this conversation entitled Algeria, a Legacy, we have the pleasure and honor to welcome virtually Alice Zeniter from France. Alice Zeniter is a playwright, a writer and a theater director. She is the author of 4 novels, Sombre Dimanche, winner of several awards, le prix du livre inter, le prix des lecteurs de l'Express et le prix de la closerie des Lilas, and Juste avant l'oubli, which won the prix Renaudot des lycéens. L'art de perdre was shortlisted for the prix Goncourt and won the prix Goncourt des lycéens and several foreign Goncourt prizes from Poland, Spain, Belgium, and Switzerland. It was published in the UK by Picador in Frank Wynn's translation as The Art of Losing. Her latest book in French is Je suis une femme sans histoire. And we are also pleased to welcome physically Natalya Vince, who will moderate this discussion. Natalya Vince is a historian of modern and contemporary Algeria and France and reader in North African and French studies at the University of Portsmouth. Her works include an important book called Our Fighting Sisters, Nation, Memory and Gender in Algeria. However, I regret to inform you that Kauter Adimi, who was supposed to participate in this conversation, had to cancel today for personal reasons beyond her control. Nevertheless, we will talk about her books, Nos Richesses, or A Bookshop in Algiers, in Chris Andrews' translation, published by Serpent's Tail. I also welcome the actress Olivia Ross, who will read some extracts from the books. Today's event is organized by the French Institute in partnership with English Pen's Common Currency Centenary Program, which brings together writers, readers, and activists for events, residencies, campaigns, and conversations across the UK and Ireland. English Pen works to promote literature and the right to freedom of expression. And now, Natalya, if you please.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you very much for that introduction. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm delighted to be here tonight. The Algerian War of Independence between 1954 and 1962 was one of the hardest wars of decolonization of the 20th century, both politically and militarily. Since the 1990s, it's been commonplace to use the phrase Franco-Algerian memory wars to talk about the legacies, the contemporary resonance, and the memories of this conflict. But this is a term that really we need to deconstruct and think about what it really means. So firstly, when we use the term Franco-Algerian memory wars, it implies that this is a memorial conflict between 2 states, France and Algeria, or between 2 peoples, Algerians and French, whereas the reality is a lot more complicated than that. It also suggests that this conflict is kind of still sort of a face-to-face between France and Algeria, as in, 54 to 62, whereas the memorial debates have evolved differently in the French context and in the Algerian context in the subsequent intervening years. That's not to deny the intertwined nature of these memorial debates, but to underline the importance of the languages and the codes and the references that have developed on either side of the Mediterranean, as well as across the Mediterranean. The other thing to really underline about the limitations of sort of Franco-Algerian memory wars is the idea that they suggest that memory generates debates rather than perhaps memory finds itself as the location of debates, and debates that are much more present, debates about national identity, debates about immigration, debates about political legitimacy that are expressed through debates about memory, a proxy war, if you like, rather than a continuation of the anti-colonial conflict. The other thing that we'll be talking about tonight is the way in which literature, art, and cinema are precursors in many ways in writing the history of the Algerian War of Independence. In many ways, artists, filmmakers, and writers were far in advance of historians in writing the history of the war, and particularly when archives were inaccessible, and particularly when those archives contained many silences. And art has been a fantastic tool as well in bringing to light sort of those voices that have been silenced and challenging, in that sense, the dominant narrative. But art and literature has also, in many ways, consolidated a dominant narrative. It shapes the popular representations that we have of the war. Who can think of the Algerian War of Independence without thinking of Gilles Pontecorvo's 1966 film, The Battle of Algiers? We think about the huge literary production about the 17th of October 1961 that has really made that a subject of study for historians subsequently. And I think this is why both Kawthar Adimi's Nos Richesses, A Bookshop in Algiers, and Alice Zeniter's L'Art de Perdre, The Art of Losing, are such wonderful books because they're both about the War of Independence and they take us beyond it, from 1930s to the present, crisscrossing across the Mediterranean. And these are books not just about the war, but about family, place, memory, and transmission in a much more universal sense. So my first question to you, Alice, is a very historian question, so I'm betraying my disciplinary background here, but about your research process. And when you read your wonderful book, you can tell how much research has gone into this. And there are fragments of archives in it. It reads like that. So could you tell us a little bit about your research process and also how you positioned yourself in relation to some of the dominant narratives about the war and about Harki in France in relation to the war, or whether or not you sort of sought to avoid those altogether? So sort of a two-in-one question about sort of process and dominant narratives.
It's a very big question, and I'm afraid my answer will be a bit messy, but my research was messy as well, so that is quite normal. See, the thing is that at first, I wanted to be, I planned to be very organized. I thought that I would do my research and then from this material, I would start writing properly the novel. But I kept finding during the research some parts that either made me want to write or that I wanted to put in the novel, like some of the archives, the language, like notes from the French government, the way they talk about the population in Algeria. It's in the same time, like, so well put and quite polite and so violent and cruel, and I was thinking like I could never invent such language. So this part I need to take to insert in my novel, and then for my research I used books by historians, but I used sociology books as well, and especially one by Abdelmalek Sayad, which is called La Double Absence in French, and one by Bourdieu, which is called Algeria 60. And in these books you can find you can find like the voices of the people that were interviewed for the book. So, like you have this sociological work, which is like you record the people and then you type it down and you keep everything, the imperfections, the way sometimes actually, the sentence doesn't really make sense because someone forgot the negation or something. And these voices, they created characters for me. So I was actually, like piling books for my research and with my right hand taking notes and starting writing chapters. And it was messy, but it was really enthusiastic and thrilling, and that was the good part. The problematic part of the research was like when I wanted to when I wanted to find some materials about Kabylie in the beginning of the 20th century or the end of the 19th, so before any kind of industrialization, then what I could find was really old, with like old-fashioned racism documents. And they were really describing the population, like, you know, like you're talking about them like you talk about children, and actually, like the documents say it, you know, like you have to treat these people like they're 8 years old, you know, they might be a bit shrewder, but they're really like big kids. And so, you know, like to get the informations that I needed, information about architectures, food, social system, organization of justice, I needed to scrap all this phrases, patronizing tone that the French would adopt toward the Algerian population, and that was hellish. And my last problem was that the harki situation in French, it had been for from the beginning, I mean, right after the war, it had been a theme for the extreme right wing. Like they were the one who said, like, you know, see, these people, they are the proof that French Algeria was a good thing, and that the French should have never left Algeria. So in the beginning, all the articles that I could find, they were like political and not from my side, and I was really afraid that anyone who would have documented the harkis would be my political enemy. And so, you know, how could I use this? How could I use this paper if, you know, if it's aimed at the opposite goal that I put to myself when I started writing. So that was quite difficult, and that answers, I think, your question about the dominant narrative that I wanted to smash, which is that the existence of the people we called harkis was proof that colonization was a good thing, and that these people, you know, like they really loved France, and that, you know, they were ready to shed their blood for France because France was such a good thing. And I want to tell the story differently, to say, like, no, it's not actually what happened. You need you need to address all the multiple reasons. You need to stop thinking about choice, because what does it mean, a choice? Like, it means that you have all the information and then you can choose. But it wasn't like that. Like for the peasants in the 50s on top of the mountain, how could you pretend that they knew what was happening in the whole country, and that they were choosing a side, if they were forced, if they were starved, all of that? You know, it's not a choice and it's not love for France. But this narrative was so strong in France that, I needed to write against it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that really struck me as I was reading the book. So the story of Ali, the grandfather, and he's not actually even recruited into a harki unit. He's not even an auxiliary in the French army. He finds himself labeled as a harki, but actually he's someone that fought in the Second World War. He hangs around in the Veterans Association. He doesn't like his neighbors who went over to the FLN, so it's sort of the perpetuation of that local feud. That's kind of why he sort of finds himself on the sides of the French. But the sort of the messiness of that situation really emerges, and I think sort of the messiness that you describe in the process and the reading against the grain are very much sort of, you know, historians techniques, and that sort of messiness and the richness and the complicated nature of sort of human experience sort of really emerges from the story as well. So this sort of leads me on to the next story. So the next question that I had, because it was very clear that you were writing back to a certain extent at a very simplistic, instrumentalizing narrative about harkis as, you know, sort of loyalists to France who were brutally betrayed by the end of sort of French Algeria, and the way in which that's been used politically. And there's sort of always the big story, the big narrative, and then there's this whole series of sort of smaller stories. And I know your book has been translated now into more than 10 languages. So I was just wondering, sort of a question really about sort of audience, and, you know, from all the talks that you've done so far, what are people getting out of your book who don't necessarily know the history of the Algerian War, don't necessarily know the history of Algeria or the history of France? Can you see ways in which people are engaging in the big story and the little story differently, or are there sort of is it being engaged in some quite universal ways?
I think what I really enjoyed when I traveled abroad to talk about my book in different countries is that I always learned about stories that I didn't know about the country, because the way people engaged with the book is by it's not a comparison, but it's just like linking it maybe to stories of migration in their country, and so, you know, it's always this which was something that I wanted to do with the book as well. You know, like the way we talk about migration is just like it's partial, it's cut, it's only one part. You don't have the beginning of the journey. You just have the immigration and not the emigration at the beginning. So the country where these people are from, it disappears when you talk about it, when you just see them as immigrants and never as people living a country, a life, a real culture, something that shaped them. And yeah, so you know, like when I went to Norway, I found myself talking with a bunch of Somali people, and they were telling me that the Somali community is really strong and actually quite old in Norway, but they don't exist in the fictions that are produced in the country. You know, they never appear in movies or books, and when you think about Norway, you never think of the Somali. When I went to Germany, they told me about the people from the East territories that had to be brought back in the West, and the way they were seen as poor peasants and always you know, like not nice, and how they needed to live with these prejudices, like sometimes you know, that they hid the fact that their parents or grandparents came from the East territories. And so, yeah, it's not actually, you know, sometimes I feel that people really love the book and feel close to the book, and it has nothing to do about Algeria at all. It's because they project their own migration stories, and I love it. I mean, it's beautiful.
And do you think that's one of the dominant narratives that you were also perhaps sort of seeking to smash, sort of the idea that Franco-Algerian history is some really exceptional, that there's no equivalent to it, that it's particularly sort of passionate, particularly violent, that no possible comparison could be made? Did you maybe have that in the back of your mind when you were writing?
Yeah, because I think sometimes, and sorry, maybe the comparison will seem like really, really stupid, but sometimes in France and in the way people talk about Algeria, and for example, in the way the former Pieds Noirs talk about it, you kind of get the feeling it's like a couple. They're talking about their love story, and they say, like, you know, like no one can understand what it was, what it means, like it's only between the two of us. And then you're, you know, like the spectator from the outside, and you're like, well, I can see that it's an abusive relationship. You know, I don't need to know everything. I don't need to get the intensity of the feelings to see that this is abusive. And yeah, I kind of wanted to smash this bubble, this like, you know, like terrible things happen, but we loved each other, and it's really between us. It's between Algeria and me, you know, like no, it's not. It's actually a story of colonization, of migrations, of decolonizations, and still migrations, and that's quite that's quite common. It can be told, like in every country in the world, more or less.
Absolutely, and I particularly love the way you talk about sort of wanting to get rid of some of that really sort of almost cliched language about sort of a couple that breaks up, and very sort of psychologizing sort of language as well. And the book is absolutely beautifully written. There's not a single cliche that you can find in it, which I think is a perfect moment to introduce the first reading with Olivia Ross.
Rivesaltes est en mouvement permanent. Arrivée et départ, addition, soustraction. Certains semblent quitter le camp avant même d'y être entrés. Ce sont pour la plupart des militaires restés dans l'armée française et qui peuvent obtenir rapidement un ordre de mission. Ou bien des civils dont la famille est déjà installée en France et qui disposent d'un point de chute. Pour les autres, c'est le flottement. Entourés de départs et d'arrivées de tous côtés, la tête leur tourne. Au fil des semaines puis des mois, les hommes et les familles sont triés, répartis, redistribués. On sépare des voisins, des amis, des proches qui venaient de se retrouver ici et à qui ce regroupement fortuit offrait une consolation appréciable. Ils attribuent ce nouveau déchirement à leur malchance, à la cruauté du hasard, aux nécessités d'un monde du travail qu'ils connaissent mal. Personne ne leur explique que le service des Français musulmans, rattaché au tout nouveau ministère des rapatriés, a recommandé qu'on veille à ne pas mettre dans les hameaux des familles de même origine, car cela amène inévitablement, en cas de difficulté, les membres de cette famille à faire bloc, et de ce fait à opposer une résistance accrue en cas d'application de mesures de discipline. Selon un principe que certains font remonter à la Grèce antique et d'autres au Sénat romain, un principe que Machiavel a rendu si populaire qu'il est devenu platement proverbial, on les divise pour mieux régner sur eux. Certains partent dans le nord, où les bouches ouvertes des mines les attendent. Ceux-là sont généralement des grands gaillards aux épaules solides, du muscle sans langage. D'autres s'éparpillent en étoiles vers la centaine de hameaux créés par l'Office national des forêts pour générer de l'emploi. D'autres encore s'éloignent vers l'ouest, en direction des Landes, pour y trouver non pas un travail, mais un autre camp, celui de Bias, où ils prennent la suite des Français d'Indochine, eux-mêmes envoyés vers un autre camp. C'est la danse des perdants des guerres coloniales. En regardant ceux qui montent dans ces camions-là, il est facile pour ceux qui restent à Rivesaltes de comprendre que leur destination est un mouroir pour les vieux et les invalides. Ali et sa famille, pendant de longs mois, ne sont envoyés nulle part. Hamid éprouve de la honte à ce que personne ne veuille des bras de son père, ceux-là même qu'il a toujours regardé comme une émanation de puissance brute et qui pendent maintenant le long de ses flancs, inutiles et flacides. Ils se résolvent à aménager l'espace qui est le leur, ici, à Rivesaltes, en attendant que quelque chose de l'ordre de la vie commence. En agrafant des sacs poubelles dépliés sur des cadres de bois, ils ont fabriqué une porte qu'ils placent devant l'ouverture de la tente. Le lendemain, d'autres familles les imitent. Il se crée une sorte de mode dans le camp. Il faudrait un jour analyser comment et pourquoi cela est possible. Que des modes apparaissent, jusque dans le dénuement extrême. Qu'il se dégage tout à coup une manière d'être pauvre, que les autres veulent imiter. À chaque coup de vent, il faut aller chercher la porte mobile quelques allées plus loin, mais les familles le font, patiemment, soigneusement. La porte leur donne l'illusion qu'ils peuvent préserver à l'intérieur de la tente une intimité encombrée qui leur appartient, qu'ils peuvent choisir d'ouvrir ou de fermer leur domaine, qu'ils en sont maîtres. Rivesaltes is constantly changing. Arrivals and departures, addition, subtraction. Some people appear to leave the camp almost before they have arrived. mostly soldiers enlisted in the French army who can quickly be given a new posting, or civilians who have family already settled in France and have somewhere to go. For everyone else, the future is uncertain. The constant arrivals and departures are bewildering. As the weeks and months pass, the men and their families are organized, distributed and redistributed, resulting in the separation of neighbors, friends, and relatives who happened upon each other here and whose chance grouping afforded considerable solace. They blame this new separation on their misfortune, on a cruel twist of fate, or the workings of a world they know very little. Nobody tells them that the Department of French Muslims, attached to the newly established Ministry of Repatriation, has issued recommendations that families from the same area should not be relocated to the same villages, since, in times of difficulty, this invariably leads members of such families to join forces, and in doing so, to present a greater resistance when it is necessary to implement disciplinary measures. Using a principle some trace back to ancient Greece and others to the Roman Senate, a principle made so popular by Machiavelli that it has become proverbial, they practice, divide, and rule. Some leave for the north, where the gaping mouths of mines await them. For the most part, these are strapping, broad-shouldered young men, muscle without the power of speech. Others are scattered like a galaxy of stars around the hundreds of settlement villages that the National Forestry Office has built to generate employment. Still, others head west to the Department of Landes, where what awaits them is not employment but a camp outside Bias, where they will replace the French from Indochina, who are being relocated to a different camp in a game of musical chairs for those who lost the colonial wars. As they look at those climbing aboard the trucks, those still left behind in Rivesaltes quickly realize that they are destined to be sent to a place for the aged and the infirm, a place to die. For many months, Ali and his family are not sent anywhere. Hamid feels ashamed that no one seems to want his father's brawn. Those powerful arms he has always seen as the epitome of brute strength dangle limp and useless by his side. The families decide to rearrange the space they have been allocated in Rivesaltes while they wait for some semblance of order to return to life. Using plastic bags stapled to wooden frames, they fashion a door that they place outside the opening of their tent. By the following day, other families have done the same. It becomes something of a trend in the camp. One day there should be a study of how and why this is possible, that trends can appear even in condition of abject poverty, that it is possible for a peculiar way of being poor to emerge, which others strive to imitate. After the slightest gust of wind, families have to go fetch their door a few alleys away. But still, the families create these doors, patiently, meticulously. The doors sustain the illusion that within the tent, they can maintain a crowded privacy that is theirs alone, that they can choose whether to open or close their domain, that they are masters in their own home.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Got quite a few questions actually prompted by that extract, but I'm going to start with a translation one. There was a phrase in the French, "C'est la danse des perdants des guerres coloniales," which in the English was translated into a game of musical chairs for those who lost the colonial wars. It's not quite the same sense, I don't think. So perdants may be the losers, those who lost out in colonial wars, rather than the people who actually lost the wars. And it made me think of part one of the book, which is entitled L'Algérie de Papa est morte. And this is a phrase of de Gaulle, really, where he's seeking to reinvent French Algeria in the sense, bring in, alongside huge repression, a number of reforms to sort of try and make true the claim that Algeria is French and sort of challenge the status quo of sort of, the unequal relationships of the settler colony. And thinking about those sort of the losers of colonial wars, it's interesting, isn't it, that the people who lost the war, so de Gaulle, he remains president until 1969. So really, he's not a loser in 1962. All the French army officers, they reinvent themselves as specialists in counterinsurgency. So that thinking about who loses from colonial wars, who would see themselves as a loser from these wars, and certainly, former white settlers would. But there's a question mark, I think, in the book about whether, the family, Ali, Yemma, Hamid, they actually see themselves as having lost or as losers of a colonial war, or whether they might understand their lives in quite different ways. I was struck sort of thinking about that as something that some of the women that I interviewed in my own oral history said to me about 1962, those who had been on the winning side, they'd been in the FLN, but they didn't think that their contribution had been sufficiently acknowledged. And they said, some people got villas after 62 and we got tents. So this question of sort of framing and how people sort of frame their lives and their resilience as well, the idea we're going to have a door, even if we haven't really got anywhere proper to live, we're going to have a door, really comes through in that extract. And it seems to me sort of one of the key themes of your book is about people's capacity to reinvent themselves. And those who can reinvent themselves are kind of the survivors, and those who can't are the losers. I don't know whether that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I think I think, I don't know, like I wouldn't maybe categorize the people in the clear way that you do, but I was really actually, I was really interested in this question, which is like how many losses or how big a loss can you take in, and what can be a part of your life, or actually not a part of your life because it was lost, and I started to think about it because from the conversations I had with people who left Algeria in 62 and mostly the women, they were talking about what seemed to me as a very small loss, like, I left my earrings at home and I really love these earrings. And I was thinking, like, it's really weird because actually, you lost the house in which you left the earrings as well. And speaking about that, you never went back to the country. So you lost the country as well. So, but what is it that the thing you think about is such a small thing, or a dress, or and I was thinking maybe it's because it's easier, we can all deal with that. Losing a piece of jewelry, losing our favorite piece of clothes, or this kind of thing. Or maybe it's because losing a country doesn't make any sense. You never lose a country, like, it's way too big. You lose a house, your favorite street in a village, you lose the tree you like to lie under, but one never loses a country. Maybe that's the idea. And maybe losing a war makes no sense at all either, because like, maybe if you're the general who planned it, maybe you can say that you lose the war, but but you will still be a big name, a general, like you will, so maybe it's more like, have you been hurt in a battle, or have you seen the battle? Have you been traumatized by seeing a battle, or even hearing it? Like, this losing thing is, it infuses the whole book, and in addition, when I was reading Sayad and Bourdieu's work about Algeria during the French colonization, I read this thing about the smashing of the traditional lifestyle because of the technology, the way of free thinking, like the sharing of the land and all of that, and suddenly I thought, like, Algeria was the Algeria that Ali and Yema knew. It was lost before the war, and before they realized that they would have to leave. Like, even if they had stayed, this way of living in the village, it had been lost. It was dying and shattered by the French colonization and all this new way of thinking. Of production and all of that will happen, like even after France left in the socialist Algeria, like bringing in the machines, the tractors, and all of that. And so that this idea that we talk about losing a war, but actually life was lost even before there was a war. And I wanted to put all that in the book, the idea of that losing and winning, it's so complicated. It's like a millefeuille, this French bakery. Like, when you think that it's one, it's actually 1,000 layers of things that you can go through, but what is lost and what is gained and all of that.
Thank you so much, Alice. I think this is a good moment to perhaps introduce our second reading, which is from Kauthar Adimi's A Bookshop in Algiers, Nos Richesses, in French. And we're going to be going backwards in time chronologically. We started in 1962, and we're going back now to 1954.
Algérie, 1954. Le 10 octobre, dans une maison du très populaire quartier de Bab el-Oued se réunissent 6 hommes. Quelques mois auparavant, la révolution armée a été votée dans le plus grand secret. La nuit du 31 octobre au 1er novembre a été choisie pour marquer le déclenchement de l'insurrection. Dimanche 24 octobre, les 6 corrigent le tract qui sera envoyé aux journaux étrangers depuis le Caire. Leurs moyens sont faibles. Seulement 1 millier d'hommes dispersés sur tout le territoire et peu entraînés au combat. Pas d'argent, quelques centaines d'armes et surtout un peuple à convaincre par tous les moyens. La réunion terminée, ils descendent dans la rue vers la caserne Pélissier, non loin du cinéma Majestic, et entrent chez un photographe. Dans le studio, ils s'apprêtent pour la circonstance. Tentent de discipliner les cheveux frisés, vérifient les cravates. Il n'y a que 2 tabourets. On réfléchit, le photographe donne son avis. Finalement, Krim Belkacem et Larbi Ben Midi s'assoient devant Rababita, Mostefa Ben Boulaïd, Didouche Mourad et Mohamed Boudiaf. Attention, on ne bouge plus. Clac. Ils ignorent que cette photo fera le tour du monde. Qu'un demi-siècle plus tard, elle continuera d'être montrée aux enfants dans les écoles. Au même moment, Jean Vaujour, directeur de la Sûreté, peste contre sa hiérarchie qui refuse de prendre au sérieux les multiples alertes qu'il adresse. L'homme est tendu. Il se passe quelque chose. En métropole, on pense que les massacres de 1945 ont tué toute idée de révolte au sein de la population indigène. L'armée d'Ho Chi Minh a infligé au corps français une terrible défaite à Dien Bien Phu. Plus que jamais, la France a besoin de calme dans sa colonie algérienne. À 1h15 du matin, à travers toute l'Algérie, des attentats visent des bâtiments officiels. On compte une dizaine de morts, dont 4 militaires. Une proclamation politique est envoyée aux journaux de plusieurs capitales, réclamant le départ de la France. Au matin du 1er novembre, il fait un froid glacial. À peine réveillés, nous découvrons à la radio les événements de la veille. Le blanc du ciel, le blanc de la lumière, le blanc des visages. En une nuit, l'Algérie se vide de ses couleurs. Il n'est pas possible de décrire autrement notre pays. Même le soleil est blanc. Et soudain, tout bascule. Nous devenons des fanatiques, des ingrats, des enfants manipulés. Nos attentats sont lâches, nos crimes odieux, et nous sommes indignes de la France. De jeunes hommes à moitié nus sont tirés de leur lit et embarqués dans des cars de police. On ne traîne plus. Le couvre-feu est là. Nous sommes tous menacés et surveillés. Des bagarres éclatent, à coups de poing ou de tête. Dans les cafés, nous ne jouons plus aux cartes le soir. Les marchands de beignets baissent la tête lorsque les militaires passent devant eux. Les ultras d'Algérie tractent à tout va. Partout, des menaces et des grèves. C'est le temps des regards de haine et de peur, de frustration et de colère. Un mélange épais qui nous enveloppe, nous submerge. Plus jamais nous ne dormirons en paix. On the 10th of October, in the working-class neighborhood of Bab el-Oued, 6 men gather. Some months earlier, a motion in favor of armed revolution was carried at a street meeting. Sorry, let me try that one again, actually. Sorry, got distracted. Live performance is back. Okay. Algeria, 1954. On the 10th of October, in the working-class neighborhood of Bab el-Oued, 6 men gather. Some months earlier, a motion in favor of armed revolution was carried at a secret meeting. The night of the 31st of October and the 1st of November has been chosen to mark the beginning of the insurrection. On Sunday, the 24th of October, the 6 edit the tract that will be dispatched from Cairo to foreign newspapers. Their resources are meager. Only 1,000 men scattered around the country with little combat experience for the most part, no money, a few hundred weapons, and most of all, a population that they must convince in any way they can. After the meeting, they go down the street towards the Policier barracks, not far from the Majestic Cinema, and enter a photographer's studio. There, they prepare themselves for the occasion, trying to tidy their curly hair, checking their ties. There are only 2 stools. They consider the problem. The photographer offers his advice. And finally, Krim Belkacem, Larbi Ben Midi sit in front of Rababitat, Mostefa Ben Boulaid, Didouche Mourad, and Mohamed Boudiaf. Hold still now. Click. They don't know that this photo will be seen all around the world, that half a century later it will be shown to children at school. At the same time, Jean Vaujour, director of security, is cursing his superiors who refuse to give any credit to the alerts that he keeps sending them. He's on edge. Something is brewing. Back in France, they think that the 1945 massacres have killed any thought of revolt in the Arab population. Ho Chi Minh's army has inflicted a terrible defeat on the French at Dien Bien Phu. More than ever, France needs peace and quiet in its Algerian colony. At 1:15 a.m., throughout Algeria, official buildings are attacked. There are 10 fatalities, including 4 soldiers. A proclamation is sent to various capitals demanding the withdrawal of the French. On the morning of the 1st of November, the weather is icy cold. Barely awake, we hear the news of the previous night's event on the radio. The sky, the light, the faces in the street, everything is white. In a single night, Algeria is drained of color. There is no other way to describe our country. Even the sun is white. Suddenly, utterly, everything is changed. Now we are fanatics, ingrates, puppets of foreign powers. Our attacks are cowardly and we are unworthy of France. Young men are pulled from their beds half naked and taken away in police cars. No more half measures. A curfew is imposed. We are all under threat, under surveillance. Brawls break out, punches and headbutting. We no longer play cards in the cafe at night. The beignet vendors look down when the soldiers go past. The French-Algerian ultras distribute tract after tract, threats and strikes everywhere. These are the days of stares that brim with hate and fear, frustration and anger, a thick blend that envelops and engulfs us. We will never sleep in peace again.
Thank you so much again, Olivia, for those wonderful readings. I'm going to pick up with a question for Alice about the nous, the we at the end of the English version. Both of these novels have sort of a multiplicity of voices in them. So there's the we that we have, that we just heard in that extract there. There's also in that novel the diary entries of Edmond Charlot. There's the voice of Riyad, and in The Art of Losing, there are the voices of Hamid, Ali, Yemma, Naima. There's this wonderful sort of polyphony that is across sort of both sets of novels. Before I came here tonight, Alice, I did check what other questions you've been asked in other events. And I noticed that one of the questions that has irritated you at different points was that it's constant expectation that your novel is in some way autobiographical, that it's linked back to a family history. So I had a question about sort of the expectation, if you're from the Global South or if you have family from the Global South, that you are a kind of spokesperson, an intermediary to explain that history to people in the Global North. And also, I guess, sort of the other side of the coin, if you're writing about experiences that are quite far from your own, the accusation of sort of, cultural appropriation that we've seen in relation to the Dutch translation of Amanda Gorman's poems, or debates about Jeannie Cummings' American Dirt, for example. So as a writer, I mean, how do you negotiate those two things? Between sort of being expected to be sort of the spokesperson, expected that everything you write has some kind of autobiographical argument, and the increasing tensions, I guess, particularly in young adult fiction about cultural appropriation. Of course, your book was chosen as Le Prix Goncourt des Lycéens as well. So just how do you negotiate those two pièges, those traps?
First, about being a spokesperson, it's really annoying. It's really annoying because it happens to a specific kind of writers, so mostly, how would you say it? Just people from foreigner regions, people from migration trajectories, this kind of thing. Women as well, in a way. We are kind of supposed to be a we, and it doesn't, so like it doesn't help us to be writers, because what we we see as a great writer, at least in France, but it's this individual point of view on things. It's this unique point of view. So you're supposed to be an I, and there's supposed to be only one you. So when you're said to be speaking for a group of people, or representing all of them, and this kind of talk, it takes away the possibility of being seen as a true artist, and it's the other thing that actually, what I could find about situations like the one I write about in the novel. It was always labeled and published as memoirs, or documents, and I didn't want, I thought it was as well like stripping them out of the dignity. Like I wanted my characters to be seen as characters from a big novel, and this is why, I think why the book is so long. Like I wanted this thing to be a big fat novel that you would have to see as a big fat novel, meaning as an act of writing. Like if you weigh the thing, you have to think that it took me some time to write it. It's not just me like telling a story that I lived, or that was told to me by my family. Like I created something, and I weave together several voices, the narrations as well, kind of change. Like in the first part in Algeria, I wanted it to have this kind of old school things, and of course all these terms that can describe the everyday life. So in the village, things about the olive trees, words from 3 different languages, some Kabyle, some Arabic, and then in the third part, like when I started it, I wanted it to have a kind of a Virginie Despentes touch. So something you would think, oh yeah, like it's contemporary, big city, Paris, blah blah blah, all of that. And I guess that in creating this multiplicity of voices, I wanted to say, like, this is a work of literature. It's not that because it's about people in a camp that it's reporting or memoirs or anything like that. It was kind of a fight as well, like. And the cultural appropriation, I don't know. It's not something I think about, because as a fiction writer, of course I'm going to put myself in characters that are not me. So it's just like it's a question that I ask myself all the time. Like if I create a character which is not me, and I want to build it and to feed it with things that are not cliches, then that means that I need to work a lot. I need to talk a lot with people that are like my characters, like I don't know, same background, same lived in the same city, had the same job, experienced the same things, and it's not like am I stealing something which is not mine? It's more like, am I ready to give it the years that it needs so I can say something interesting, instead of, like writing something that from an outsider point of view is just like, it's just the surface. And I'm not interested in in doing that, in doing this shallow thing. So yeah, it's more like, can I bring something into this, and to give it the time that it demands, because it's a long time. It's years of my life. So this is the way I think about it.
Thank you. And I think it seems like a really good moment to open up to questions from our live audience. So we do have a microphone that is going. Oh, you can speak. And if you can't hear, I will repeat the question.
Okay.
So a mixture of low tech and high tech. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask? Yeah, we've got a question from Latifa.
Maybe not a question, but just
Comment.
a comment. Yeah.
Short one.
Thank you very much. It looks fascinating. I think I needed to read this book. But I just want to reflect on my own research I conducted with women who left Algeria, who fled Algeria during the 90s, during the Black Decade. And in the contrary of what we said, they all told me, the women I have interviewed, all told me we have lost the country, rather than we have lost a house or lost something. They were all of them had this strong impression that they have actually lost the country. And the second point I would say, they were all talking about how the life was in Algeria before the 90s. In the 70s, we've been doing this, we've been doing that. And then talking about the B, where they are, like how, obviously my research was not only with women who left to who migrated to France. Very few, in fact, have done in France. But here in the UK, in Canada, and in the US, they were all talking about having lost a lot of privilege to find themselves seeking asylum or with no paper or something like this. So I think in between 62 and 92, a lot of things happened in Algeria, and the context is different. Yeah, this is just my reflection on what you said. I found it interesting that someone told you, oh, I lost something like a house, and I do personally work with other refugees, and lots of refugees and Syrians will tell you, oh, I lost my house, I used to have this. And those particular group of women I worked with who fled the 90s, the Black Decade, they were all mourning in Algeria that they actually lost. That was part of my research. So.
Thank you, Latifa. Alice, would you say that sort of reflects not only the time difference, but maybe social class differences in social class as well between women university educated who left Algeria in the 1990s and the rural populations that your book is really about?
Of course, that has to play a big part, but I'm thinking as well that maybe, just the fact that 30 years after the independence, the idea of Algeria as a country, as a nation, it has a strength that it probably, that probably wasn't there in the 50s or the 60s, and not just because of the political situation, but as well because for some parts of Algeria, traveling to another part was really difficult and really long, and so you wouldn't think about the whole country, which is a very big one, actually, but you would think about your region, your part, your village, and this is what I was trying to write about as well in the Veterans Assembly with Ali and his friends, and that when they talk about independence, they don't know what. It's not independence which is blurry. It's what is a country, and what is our status, we're Kabyles and the Arabs, what's the togetherness, what will it be? Freedom is way easier to think at the scale of a village. When you say, okay, think about it at the scale of a country, they're all a bit lost because they're uneducated and traveling is hard.
Yeah, so it's about how people sort of imagine their place in the world. We've got another question at the back, possibly the last question for this evening.
I assume that you knew quite a bit about the subject before you started, but were there things that really surprised you or shocked you when you were doing your research?
I don't. I guess I don't know. I guess I could say, I could say that everything shocked me, or in the same way, I could easily say that nothing surprised me because actually no, because actually I didn't know that long before I started writing. I started to write thinking that I will use the story of my family as a how do you say backbone in column vertebral, yeah, and I knew so few indication about my family story that it was like a game, like I had a point here and a point there and a point here, and then I needed to do my research and then to write a fiction so that I could draw lines between the points and make something that actually was a shape and not all this scattered thing. Well, I guess in a way, if something really surprised me is that I realized that some of the things of the really few things that were passed on to me were wrong. That actually, I was doing my research and then I was thinking like, oh, this is weird because this punitive expedition against the Harkis that I was told about in the 70s, it never existed. I cannot find it in any history book. So and then I had to make some calls to historians or write letters, and they explained to me that it was it was not any aggressive politics against Harkis. It was the agriculture socialist revolution that actually divided the lands of my on my family, and I found it. Yeah, I was. I think I was really surprised and amused in the same time. Like, I felt my whole life that I had been missing informations that my family should have given to me, and then suddenly I realized that the fact that my family gives me something doesn't mean that it's true. I kind of thought about it, like my family's way of my family's narrative about my ancestors' country was like the gospel, and if I didn't receive it, then something was lost, and if I had to go through historians or artists, and it was just like a second choice. And then suddenly I thought, okay, you can leave something and tells it, and the fact that you leave it doesn't mean that what you will say about it is true, because you might have misunderstood, you might have been given wrong information, you might have invented some of the stories, because one cannot live with holes, so you patch it up, and then in the end you have a fiction. That was my big revelation. Maybe it sounds silly and you all knew it already, but that was my big shock and surprise.
A perfect revelation, I think, to end upon. Thank you so much, Alice, for being with us tonight. Thank you for your wonderful book, The Art of Losing, which is out now in English translation. But you can also read the French version. They do French lessons at the Institut Français, although you might have to stay for a few years before you have the necessary level to read this sophisticated and beautifully written novel. Thank you to Kautha Adimi for a bookshop in Algiers, which you should also read in the French version, Nos Richesses. we could talk about the difference in title at another time. Olivia Ross, thank you so much for your wonderful readings that really brought this work to life. Tomorrow night we have another wonderful conversation where you can join the feminist activist Françoise Vergès and Diora Shadijanova, who is the opinions editor of Gaudem, for a conversation about intersectional feminism entitled Decolonial Feminism. So that's tomorrow, Wednesday, the 29th of May at 6 p.m. at the French Institute, l'Institut Français, on site and online. Thank you everybody for joining us, and good night.
Porte-parole, si elle ne dit pas. Et donc c'est pour ça que